Hello and welcome to Academy Live episode 17.
Episode 17. Hello and welcome. And we have a lot of people from all around the world. I saw South Africa, Lima, Peru, Australia, Sweden, and so on. And
Houston, hello, welcome. Yeah, lot of friends there. Awesome. Today's episode, we are gonna talk about diffusion.
Diffusion. You know this material, very common to put in front of flashes. This is our topic today, diffusion, because it creates a lot of confusion, and we will try to straighten that out.
Excellent. So, and then also do pass on questions down here, and we will respond to them as we go.
So if you have any questions about diffusion or anything else in terms of lighting, diffusion questions today is especially good to have.
Yeah. So why are we talking about diffusion today? Well, there are many reasons. There are a lot of people that are mixing it up with soft light, for example.
Yep. They think that, oh, we need a soft light. Let's put on some diffusion. And will that happen? We will go into that. What actually will happen when you are using diffusion, when you want to have a soft light. And we will talk about what is soft light, what is hard light, and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good way to start, just by talking about the definition of soft light and hard light.
Yes.
The quality of light, where a lot of people are referring to as soft or hard light.
Yes, I think that everyone out there have their own vision of what hard light and soft light actually is. And it can be actually quite confusing when two people talking about hard light versus soft light, because they can actually think about it in different ways. So we need to have some kind of common ground on what is soft light, what is hard light. And the diffusion is one way of creating this and controlling that.
Yeah, exactly. So we have already one question: how to diffuse light in hard sunlight? That's a very, very good question, and we will get back to that. Prasad, we will absolutely talk about that once we get there. With regards to soft light and hard light, there's really one definition in there, which is the size of the light source.
That the size of the light source that depicts how wide the shadow edge will be, how wide your penumbra will be, the transition from shadow to light. You can change that width by changing the size of the light source, and this is what creates the feeling of a soft or hard light. The edge of the shadow, that is the definition of a hard light, for example. Then you have a really thin shadow edge, like a line, really hard light. Shadow turns into brightness in a really quick way, short transition, that's a hard light, and vice versa. Soft light, a very wide transition from shadow to light, then you will have a soft light. That is the definition of hard and soft light. The quality of light in terms of hard and soft, it is the transition from shadow to brightness.
Exactly. So basically, small light source, hard light, large light source, soft light.
And then we have what many people confuses with this hard and soft light. That is the contrast. How big of a difference do you have between the bright part and the shadow part? The contrast. When the shadows are really, really dark, then people think that, oh, that is a hard light. Yeah. But if we have this common ground that the hardness is actually the width of the transition of the shadow edges.
The penumbra.
The penumbra, that is what defines a hard or a soft light. For example, if I would take this light, the light source have a certain size, and if I light on Anders like this, if you look at the penumbra from...
it's so bright, you can
it's
see.
So bright, it's so bright.
But we actually have pictures prepared.
Yes, that is really great.
In the presentation.
That is better than my strange experiment.
But you can show here that this is actually a light source that has a certain size. It also has a frosted glass on it, which actually diffuses the light.
Actually, I think that we should go into the definition of the...
But it doesn't change the size of the light source.
Exactly.
But it's diffused.
So when light is diffused, what is happening then? Light, when the light rays are going really, really straight, or when the light rays are going in all directions like this, when you get a really big divergence of light rays, that when you have it really wide like this, that is a diffused light. All the light rays are going in all directions.
Scattered light.
Yeah, exactly. When the light rays are scattered, then we'll have a diffused, then the light will be diffused by this matte front.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and you can have all different kinds of material to
diffuse the light.
To diffuse the light.
To scatter the light rays.
Put this one down like this so it won't fall down.
Oh, that's great.
So for example, you could have, like here, a frosted glass that will diffuse it.
Or like this, a diffusion paper, ordinary.
Which you can buy in like these big rolls.
Yeah, from different brands like Roscoe, Lee, or
exactly.
Like smörpapper, butter paper,
baking paper,
baking paper, or just, you know.
Or shower curtains.
Yes, shower curtains. White shower curtains is really actually super cheap.
And really good to diffuse light if you're in need of that. You can also use reflectors. You know, there are different kinds of collapsible reflectors that are translucent. So they basically, you can light through this. So this is also a good way to diffuse light. And you can use something like this to answer Prasad's question, how to diffuse light in hard sunlight. So for example, you could use this to diffuse and put it just between the sun and David, and then the sunlight will actually be diffused as it hits this material on David.
And when the sun hits that diffused material, that the diffusion panel will be the light source. And the diffusion panel is much bigger than the sun, hence you will get much wider shadow edges. In other words, softer light. So when you are out in the sun and when you are diffusing the sun with the collapsible reflector or what have you, maybe a small piece of paper, the tricky part is that this diffused light, this part must be, of course, preferably wider than the thing you are shooting, because or else you will have hard sunlight on the sides of it. So it's quite common to have something big to diffuse sunlight.
Yeah, and also when you put on diffusion, let's say you're in a studio and you're shooting with a reflector, you put diffusion on it, the reflector kind of collects the light and shoots it in a certain direction with a certain spread. But when you put diffusion on it, it spreads it more or less 180 degrees.
Yes.
So that then you will hit walls and ceilings and floors, etc. And then the contrast will go down because you get creating a lot of new light sources and it fills in the shadows. And that's what we had this little image here showing on the top left you have a picture with a very, very hard light. It's a thin shadow edge which you can see, for example, here, and you can see it here under the chin as well. You see a very, very sharp edge. And the shadows are very dark because there's no light that is filling in the shadows.
Exactly. And this we will maybe perceive as a hard light.
And it is a hard light.
It is a hard light. Thanks to the thin shadow edge, it is a hard light
and
with high contrast.
And this could be a reflector, for example. And then if we put diffusion on it, and then we get light from another light sources like the walls, and now we see the shadow edge is exactly the same, both here and from the nose, but the shadows are filled with light.
And just to
lower contrast.
Lower contrast. So just to repeat what you just said, because this is really important. We haven't changed the size of the light source. We put the diffusion straight on that will fill the room, but the light source seen from this doll is still the same size. And therefore we have the same size of the penumbras, the light, the shadow edges. This is the definition of hard light with a low contrast on that image.
So basically here, so we have hard light on the top two images, one with high contrast and one with low contrast. So we really need to separate contrast versus the quality of light, as we talk about soft and hard. On the lower part, we see a large light source, because the penumbra here is very, very wide, which we can see on this picture here, on the nose shadow. So it's a soft light, but the contrast is very high, because we have probably a soft grid on this big soft box, and therefore we are limiting the light so it doesn't show, come on the background, etc. And therefore we get dark shadows, high contrast. And here we open it up and let it bounce on walls, etc. And we get a low contrast on this one. The penumbra is still just as wide, but the shadows are filled with light.
So it's really important to separate the shadow edges and the contrast.
Exactly.
Hard light is about thin shadow edges, soft light is about wide shadow edges. The contrast has nothing to do with hard or soft light.
So you can have hard light with low contrast, you can have soft light with high contrast, etc. So you can have all different combinations. And this is also very important that you control that. You can decide that as a photographer. You can decide on how do you want your picture to look like. First of all, how should the light be, hard or soft?
In other words, wide or thin shadow edge.
Yeah. And then you can decide what should the contrast be in the shadows.
Dark or filled shadows.
Yeah. So low or high contrast. All these things are easily controlled as you start playing around with light.
And if we are going back to what we have been discussing for many episodes ago and continuing on, is you control the size of the light source, right, by choosing different light sources, light modifiers. That controls the penumbra, and you control the contrast by how much does the light spread out in your environment. If you have like a big studio like we are in now, then it will be quite hard to have a low contrast, because the walls are so far away and the ceiling is actually black in here. So even if we have a light that is really spreading out, we will still have a high contrast because the walls are so far away.
Yeah. And we got a question from John here. So on the B10, can the frosted disc on the front be removed to create a hard light, or is this not recommended? Well, a couple of things. First of all, on the B10, you cannot remove the glass. You can do that on the B1 and replace it with a dome. But in any case, it doesn't matter what flash, you should never ever use a flash with a bare bulb. You should always have some kind of protection on it, if it's a dome or so forth. Always have something in front of the light bulb, because it is a light bulb. They do run out and they can actually explode, and if you are really close to someone, then you can get glass in the face. So never ever.
I don't want that now.
No. So that never. But then on the other hand, also on the other part of the question, it doesn't matter if you take this frosted glass off or on, it's still the same hardness on the light. It does not impact the hardness, because the light source is still the same.
The light source, I mean,
same size.
The flash tube is just a small tad smaller than this one,
and there's
and then you have a reflector behind it, so you won't have that effect. But if you want a harder light, there is always one solution. You have to create a smaller light source,
and you can do that by
moving it further away. That is actually, I would say, the most easy way.
Yeah.
Or you can like put something on and just have some kind of small little patch of hole that lets light through.
Snoot or something like that.
And you will, So it's all about how do I create a smaller light source to have a harder light.
Yeah. And then with regards to, we got a follow-up question on what to do regarding the diffusion panel in the sunlight suggested for fashion portfolio. Well, that's also very tricky. Right now, the really cool thing in Paris is to have really hard light. I mean, they use like really small light sources and have them far away, so you get this really flashy looking picture with really hard light. So in that case, I would say go with the sun is a perfect small light source, or a small flash.
And just to really answer your question, if you do want to have a super soft light made in sun, then of course the bigger, the more space you will have for the model to move around in with soft light. The bigger diffusion panel you have, I mean, you will have a bigger patch of soft light.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, then you will also need something to hold that up, or like if you have, you know, is it really, how do
You have these frames you can buy, like scrims, and then you can have really
exactly.
like 6 meter, massive, like the one you had in when you shot that film last time now.
Yeah, so there is of course really big ones, but they really do demand some really strong light stands or stands to hold them up and such.
Yeah.
But the bigger place you have for the model to move around, of course. Yeah.
So we also get a question follow up on with John here, snoot or grid. Well, the grid doesn't really change the size of the light source, while the snoot actually makes it a little bit smaller. So you will get harder light if you use a snoot versus a grid.
Yes, and a grid will create the patch of it, the coverage of light will be more. I think it's more pleasing. It's like it has this gradient out of the sides of the patch of the light. Hence, but with a snoot, the edges of the light is more scattered, and I don't think it looks as nice as with a grid. But with a grid, you get harder light because the light source gets smaller, and
And we get a hello from Hong Kong, and actually you're going there next week, right?
I am. I am going to Hong Kong. I'm going to Taiwan first, and then going to Hong Kong. I don't remember the dates in my head now. I'm so sorry, but I will.
Between 12th and 16th of October.
Yeah, between 12th and 16th of October, I will be in Taiwan first, and then Hong Kong. So.
And there's some kind of trade show.
Yes, there is two kinds of trade show, two different trade shows, one in Taiwan and one in Hong Kong. And I just want to pop in before I forget it about diffusion that we cannot forget.
Yeah.
That is, we are now talking about full stop diffusions. The thickest of diffusion that you can get. That the definition of a full stop diffusion is that you will not get a hot spot in it. If you have a light behind a diffusion, and when you look from it from this side, you won't see the light, the hot spot from the light. The whole diffusion will be evenly lit. That is a full stop diffusion. And then there is thinner diffusion, more see-through diffusions, like half stop, quarter of a stop, eighth stop, 16th, all the way down to I think it's like a 64th stop. Really see-through diffusion.
Yeah.
And that actually changes the distribution of the penumbra, how quickly it turns into darkness. The overall width of the penumbra is still the same, but it will go darker faster when it blends to the normal ambient light or whatever. It will feel like you will actually get a thinner penumbra. Blah, blah, blah. This is quite going maybe too deep. But if you have any questions, this kind of questions of details about the diffusion, please ask them here, and I will try to dive into them. Yeah. So now I mentioned that. Yeah, we are talking about full stop diffusion.
Yeah, we had a question on where someone is late and where can I find it later. Well, this actually will be available on Profoto's Facebook page. You can find all the episodes if you go into videos on Profoto's Facebook page, and you can scroll down. You can also go to YouTube and you'll find them there. You'll go to bisho.se. You'll find them there with a short description. And shortly, I think within a week or so, we will have a page on profoto.com under inspiration, also which is called Academy Live, and there you can find all the episodes. So,
many places.
Yeah, so we will be all over, everywhere, so that people can go in and look at different specific topics if they want to know more about softboxes or hard reflectors or whatever the topics that we've had so far. You can go in and look at them. And a visit in India, would like to meet you guys. Well, I think there is something planned for January timeframe, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, there will be something happening in India. Question here regarding buying a soft light reflector for location and wedding photography. What do you guys think of this? Well, it's good for portraits. Soft light reflectors are really good, and you have either the hard ones that, well, you can see a little bit up here in there. There's a soft light reflector version silver. That's a soft light reflector, but you can also buy the OCF version if you are using like a B1, B2 or a B10. You can buy the OCF version, which is collapsible and a lot easier to carry around.
Really a lot easier to carry around.
But if you're using a D2 or a Pro head, then you need the metal one. It's good for portraits, but I would say if you move away and trying to shoot portrait or group pictures and so forth, then you kind of lose the effect of the soft light reflector, and you only lose energy, and you use more batteries, etc.
Exactly. So. And since the soft light reflector, I don't know how it is with the OCF version, but with this version you get a really beautiful light, as you said, for close-up portraits. But when you back it up, you would start going into the light pattern, the edge of the light pattern from a soft light reflector, the hard ones, they have this brighter rim that can look kind of strange if you're using the whole patch of light from a hard beauty dish or soft light reflector. So yeah, so I would say that OCF soft light reflector for close-up portraits, that is the way to go. Or else you can use like big umbrellas or whatever to have bigger patches of lights, bigger and softer, even if you are going close with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we sell any diffusion pack with the different f-stops? No, we don't. But if you go into any camera store, they will have these rolls, or some even sell like A4 or letter-sized sheets of diffusion, so you can buy those at any store, or you can go just to a Target, Tesco, Bauhaus and buy a shower curtain and cut that one, or use small parts of that. But if you really want to have control over the f-stops, I recommend you to go to a camera store and buy, you know, full stop, half stop, quarter stop, 1/8 of a stop, etc.
And if you want to have control of the color temperature, the color change, of course, these are neutral. So when you have one color, 1 Kelvin going in this direction, you will have the same Kelvin going out on that direction.
Which you can't guarantee with a cheaper shower curtain,
of course,
for example. Because
exactly.
that could be anywhere. Depends on the material, really.
Exactly.
Cool. There's also one more thing. I think you need to go up and take some pictures and look at what happens when you use grids and diffusion. Because I've seen so many people, especially in different fashion shoots, where they have reflectors, they have grids because they want to limit the light pattern, and then they put diffusion on it. And I'd like to show that effect of what really happens.
Exactly.
Because it's not so good.
No, it's kind of interesting. But you can do it if you do it in the...
Yes.
But we will look into that.
And we have Capture One, which last week did not work for us, but I think this week it will, because we've been trying this for a couple of hours now, and of course it will not work now when we try it. But anywho, we'll send off David over here into this area where we have set up, where we have Ken there. We have, finally, he'll get to play with a Pro 10 generator. He is very much of a pro guy, and he loves his Pro 10 generators, and I keep on forcing him to work with A1s and B10s and so forth, and he gets all frustrated.
Is this the camera?
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Okay.
And so now we have a Pro 10 generator, we have a Pro head, and we have a regular zoom reflector on it.
Yes.
And if you would take a picture, I think the power level should be 1.3 over there.
Yes, it is.
Really low. And if you take a picture, and we'll see what happens with the camera.
The modeling light is not on. Is that on purpose?
You don't need it.
I don't need it. Okay, so I just take one image.
Yeah.
Let's see where we end up with. With the normal reflector, no diffusion, no grid, no anything.
Yes.
On Ken.
So now, what we can see here on the image, actually, there are a lot of interesting things happening. On the shadow, I'm not sure, I think it's visible even on the live here. You have a very, very dark patch here, and you have a second grade here, and then a third and the fourth one. You can clearly see the gradient is coming in like in stages, so it's not really smooth, right?
Yes,
so,
exactly. And those stages of a shadow is really, it's a really normal thing when you're using a normal reflector or a zoom reflector, because the zoom reflector itself creates different patches of light sources. You will have multiple light sources within. You have the flash tube, that will create one shadow, and you will have different sides of the reflector that will create new shadows. And as you said, on the image you have 4 different shadows. And that actually does not mimic the sun, for example. I mean, the sun is only one light source. That is why you have one shadow edge.
And light was all over. The background is bright, and I don't want that, so I'm going to put on a grid. So we have one of these grid holders for the zoom reflector. So we're going to put the grid. It's a honeycomb grid. I'll put that on. I can be your assistant.
Yes. You be the assistant. I will be the finger on the camera.
You'll be the master.
And
there we go. So now we have put...
So what should we suspect? We have put on a grid, and we should suspect that all the light rays that are going outwards in this direction, away from the center, will be blocked. Okay? So we will only the only light rays that will remain is the ones that goes kind of straight forward.
Okay, so we are now in capture 1. We are looking at Ken with a lot of light on the background.
And here we take the picture. 3, 2, 1, and go. Boom!
Yay, it's still working.
Still working.
We can now see on capture 1 that we have limited the light over here, so it's more focused. The edge, the shadow edge on the nose is the same, and here we see what's happening with the shadow gradient is similar as we had in the picture before. So if
because
I jump up,
we haven't actually
look at the nose shadow here, it is has exactly the same width without grid and with grid.
So we have only changed the coverage of the light. The shape of the light source is still the same.
So we haven't done anything on the size of the light source.
Exactly. But do we see any difference in contrast? We should see difference in contrast. We should have a bit...
Not much. I mean, we have such a big studio, so it doesn't really bounce that much around in different parts of...
Can I just do... I do like this. Because if you look into the right down corner, the darkness of the shadow there, you can see that without the grid, it is a tad brighter, and with the grid, the shadow is actually darker. But then we have this big studio, we have not so much walls around that can fill that shadow. So we do get a higher contrast with the grid.
And so now
we put on a diffusion one.
Exactly. And what a lot of people do is that they put the diffusion in front of...
Yeah, maybe we should show the diffusion to the... Yeah, so they can see the diffusion in the frame, because I very seldom use these frames. They are so great. I don't know why I don't use them. I just, have loose sheets of diffusion.
And that's why there's this grid and filter holder, which is really neat for the zoom head. But a lot of people, they take these, they put sheets of diffusion and they tape it on top. So I'm going to simulate that by standing and holding it in front of it.
Okay, so now we first have the flash tube, then we have the grid, and then we have the diffusion in front of the grid. Okay, I take this image. 3, 2, 1, and boom!
And then maybe check what's happening over there.
Let's see what is going on. So here we are again. We do have, if we just look at the shadow edge, it is much softer. It's not divided into different shadows.
Oh, this one here.
Yes, it's really smooth and nice. And that is because we have made the light source into one single light source. That is why we have one single shadow edge. But we have also changed the divergence of light, how much the spread of light, how big the coverage is. And there we are back again with the diffused, with a big patch of light.
Yeah, so the light source is still the same, so we can still see that the nose shadow here, nothing has changed. But we are now back to square one, where we are spreading the light everywhere. And I'm up at power level 4.7, so I'm losing a lot of power. So show the penumbra. Yes, we can do that. We can do like this.
So this question, can you please show the penumbra? This is the penumbra. You can see the penumbra there, and you can actually zoom in on the wall too, just to show the...
But that's not, so here you can, if you look at the nose shadow, there you see a sharp, because you have a fairly small light source. And then if we go to this one and look at this, exactly the same. This is with the grid, and then without anything, it's the same. So you see the penumbra, the kind of the transition from dark to light. And
Yes.
yeah. And so we are now at power level 4.7 on the on the little pack. And if I now, instead of putting the diffusion in front of, I put it behind.
So now we have the flash tube, the diffusion, and then the grid. So we create one light source of the reflector, and then we grid it so that we take away all those, we're blocking all the rays that it's going in all other directions.
And we can as well go down 1.6 f-stops.
Wow, 1.6 f-stops compared to when you had the diffusion in front.
Yes.
That's interesting. So you
And
don't
if you're
have the same power, it's a different power. So you have more power when you're doing like this.
Exactly.
That
So
is
if you're
super
running on
interesting.
batteries, for example, always put the diffusion behind the grid.
So 1.6 f-stops when you have
It behind.
That is so
And
interesting.
also, of course, as you can see now here, the picture where we put the diffusion in front, we kind of lose the effect of the grid. And if you take a picture now, we get the effect of the grid, and we get the soft gradient down here on the shadow. And also, if we look at this shadow here, still the same as we had in the past. But the only difference now is that we get diffused light, so we get the soft gradients, and we decrease the power with 1.6.
Yes, and all those multiple shadows has melted into one smooth transition.
That's correct.
And that is also the point of having diffusion in front here. If you have diffusion further away, the further away you have it from the flash. I mean, this is too small to have it further away, but if you had a bigger light, bigger diffusion, like
Let's take the...
then you will create a bigger light source, one single smooth light source.
So we have, I need to check the camera. We have diffusion here, we have small light source here, and that if I put it really close,
This size of the light source is still the same as without the diffusion, so this won't do any difference
but
at
if I
all.
move it back, I'm actually creating a larger...
Now all this is the light source, and that is why you will get wider penumbras, in other words, softer light.
And you can control it by moving it. So what I'm doing here is just moving it like this. So I can now control exactly how big the light source is by moving it back and forth.
In other words, you can control how soft you want the light to be.
Correct.
And if you even move this one closer to your subject, your model or whatever,
Exactly.
it will also go softer. And
Because
if you-
this one looks much bigger now than what it does now.
Yes. And
Big, small.
the question from earlier today with the sunlight outside, when you have a really big light source, a big diffusion panel, exactly. If you hold it up like this, I mean, I will be in the shadow of the collapsible reflector, of course, and that is where I will have this diffused soft light. So the bigger you have this,
Diffused and soft.
diffused and soft, exactly.
It's not...
So the bigger you have this, of course, the more will cover me of this diffused and soft light.
Yeah.
And if you're shooting fashion, you want to show all the clothes, hence a really, really big diffusion panel will do the trick.
Nice.
Yeah.
So going back over here, is it... Someone's asking if we finished. Well, not really, but also not too far away. So I think that clears out some questions on what we actually have done. Let's see if we have that presentation here. I'll jump into presentation mode so we can look at and analyze the pictures.
Yes.
Anna-Ret Gillblad, well, for you, This will be available on Facebook later and also on YouTube, so you can, but go back on Facebook and it will be, you can see the beginning of the class. So jumping over to the PC, here we see the image that we took with only the zoom reflector, nothing on, no grid, no diffusion or anything, and that's where we had this ugly gradient on the wall.
So well, the gradient is into different parts. It's actually different shadows, and they are created from the different parts in the zoom reflector that is have different levels of light.
Yeah, and also we have a lot of light here in the background, and that was not what we wanted, because we wanted to grid the light and have an impact on the light coverage, the spread of light.
Yes. Can I just put in that I think that many people try to mimic the sun by using maybe just a zoom reflector like this, and you will see those scattered penumbras on the nose shadow, and particularly on the neck. Now this doll don't have any neck, but when you see it on a model, you can see that they are using reflectors with no diffusion on, because of the penumbras is divided into separate parts.
Yeah.
And the sun never does that.
And then when we put the grid on, we restricted the light spread, i.e. the light coverage.
Yes, and we still have the same kind of penumbra effect going on there.
On the nose, exactly. So we have only made the light coverage smaller, but the light source has still the same size, therefore it's equally hard or soft.
And when we change the light coverage, what actually will change within the picture, except from this background now, is the contrast. If we have a smaller room, then it will be really obvious.
Yeah, huge difference.
Huge difference, yes. So the grid controls the light coverage and the contrast, depending on your environment.
Yeah. And then we use the grid, but we put the diffusion after the grid. So light bulb, grid, diffusion.
And that makes no sense, because
it makes no sense.
Yeah, because all the light that passes through the grid that gets all the light rays blocked, and then hits the diffusion that will diverge out all the rays again, so it will be diffused. Then you have just lost a lot of power, and I guess that you are losing a lot of power here.
1.6 f-stops.
Yeah, 1.6 f-stops is going away for
which is
nothing.
Crazy.
Which is crazy.
And then we put the diffusion before the grid, so light bulb diffusion and then the grid. Then we get the effect of the grid, and we get the effect of the diffusion as well, which we can see on the gradient down here. It's really smooth and nice.
And how, do you remember the power difference here in power compared to the diffusion before the grid?
Yeah, so this is 1.6 less.
Okay, 1.6 less.
Yeah, so I can go down 1.6 f-stops and get this picture.
Okay, so you're really saving energy.
A lot.
Yeah, and it's
more than double the energy if you go up. So I mean, one f-stop is double the energy, so it's almost twice the energy.
I have seen in many fashion photographers, or maybe other photographers too, but I've seen it in fashion photography that people put a lot of layers of diffusion on reflectors.
That's
like
crazy.
3 layers or 5 layers, and they say that I just want to have the light to be even softer.
Yeah.
And Anders, could you please go into how do they think? Why do they put a lot of layers of diffusion in front of a flash?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that we actually took a picture of that before, and this is the picture with only 1 layer of diffusion, and here's with 3 layers of diffusion. Absolutely no difference. The only thing that happens is that you lose power.
Yes, because the size of the light source doesn't change when you have a lot of layers of diffusion in front of the flash. The size of the light source will still be the same. In other words, the penumbra will be the same.
Yeah.
The contrast will be the same, because the light is spreading out in the same direction. You just lose power when the energy is going through all these layers of diffusion.
Yeah, every layer will eat some light,
yes.
So don't you do that.
But if you have diffusion that is thinner than our full stop, let's say a half stop or 1/8 of a stop, then of course, then you can start to add up those to get a more even light source. So, but when you have full stop diffusion, there is no point of stacking diffusion. That is just waste of energy.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yes.
So I think there are, at least there's one who's less diffused and hopefully less confused. I think we answered all the questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Depends on if you're going to put me to test now, like you normally do. Then okay.
Okay. So, how can I make A1 to get softer light with diffusion? How would you do that? Would you put diffusion on, or how do you have any suggestion?
I would use the dome.
You would use the dome.
Yeah.
So when you have the dome on.
Yeah, which is included in the A1. On the top you have a dome, and some people mix that with the omnibounce that you have for other speed lights. You have an omnibounce which actually spreads light, but this one only makes the light softer and the gradients look a lot more softer and nicer. That's what the dome does. That's the effect of it.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
And you can also, of course, use it by bouncing the light on the wall. People tend to call it that they are bouncing the lights, and they of course are on a wall to create an indirect light source.
That's true.
Yeah, and what is actually happening is that you are creating a new light source that is really big and
diffused.
And diffused, because all the light rays are going in it's really scattered.
Yeah.
So you will get really big penumbras and probably lower contrast, since you are getting new indirect light source from that light source. So a small light source doesn't mean that you always will have hard light. A small light source is fully possible to use, like walls or ceiling or diffusion materials a bit in front of it, to create a bigger light source, which is softer light.
Oh, we're getting a lot of love from South Africa. Thank you so much, Crimson. We love that. It makes our hearts so warm. And we do. I mean, we are really. We do love talking about light, but we are doing it for you guys. So we want you to understand light and all the different accessories around light, and hopefully you'll be able to create greater images and have great light in every image. That's what we really want.
Yes, we want the knowledge of light to be spread out there, because there's so much creativity out there that you can do when you can control light, and diffusion is one part of it. And
the funny thing is that there are really no stupid questions or stupid topics around light, because light can be very confusing.
Yes.
And especially when you are beginning with light.
Yeah. And I think that when you are getting into this when you get confused by light, the answer is often really simple. There is no complicated answers, but it's easy to misunderstand how things work. So when you have the basics, when you know the foundations of light, that is always kind of easy to answer all the questions.
Yeah.
And I know that there is one really misconception about the light source and the light spread and the hardness of light. That is, when you are, I mean, we have covered this, but I just will to be really, really clear. When you are diffusing the light, you will have a bigger spread of light, right?
Yeah.
That will create maybe a big indirect light source or whatever. But the size of the light source from the beginning doesn't change. And so when you have the diffusion straight on like this, I mean, I think we have said that like 5 times now, but this is so common. When you have the diffusion on like this, straight on, you will not get, I hold it like this, the size of the light source doesn't change, so you won't get any softer light. You have the same size of the penumbra, but you will probably get lower contrast. And the contrast and hardness is 2 totally different things.
We got a question now from Mark here, what we would recommend for on-camera flash diffusion for group shots.
On-camera flash?
On-camera flash. I mean, if you... ideally, even if you have a speed light or if you have a Profoto A1, I would really recommend an umbrella, a shallow umbrella, because a shallow umbrella spreads the light really widely. So you shoot into a shallow umbrella and then you fire it away. And if you are taking
but it's on camera.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're on camera, it's hard to have an umbrella because then you won't see anything through the camera.
It will look fun.
Yeah, it will look
have an umbrella.
Crazy. So that's not good. I would actually shoot bareheaded, and I would pick a light that has a nice light coverage or a light pattern.
Yeah.
For example, if you shoot with a rectangular speed light, you will get a rectangular light pattern or a stamp of light, and that will be visible in the image. Versus, for example, the A1, where we showed earlier in one of the early episodes, you have this really nice gradient when the transition from light to dark, which looks very natural. So I would go with just the bare head, and the Profoto A1 is what I would recommend.
And put the dome on to get that?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay. Maybe with the wide angle lens?
Sometimes if you're doing a wide angle, I would do wide angle rather than the dome, because the dome, it does eat a little bit of light and it doesn't help me spread the light anything. All it does is it basically makes the gradient even softer than it already is, and you lose some power. So I would rather go with the wide lens and or bare head.
And zoom the head as far
exactly, zoom out the head.
So you have the biggest light coverage. When you have a flash on camera, you will have a small penumbra because the light source is this big. If you put something in front of it to make it bigger, you will of course have a softer light, but you need something really big to have a whole group with soft light.
Yeah.
I would say that is, you have to create something really strange to do that. If you want to have a group shot with a soft light, I would say it's kind of impossible to have a on-camera flash. But you can still have a really good looking and nice looking group shot, because since the light are going straight on, the shadows will be behind everyone and the camera won't see the shadow. So it will look, it still looks really nice. If you have a beautiful pattern of light stamp, like from the A1, it will look really nice, but the shadow edges will be thin.
Yes, they will. We got a question here with regards to how if you change the angle of the light on a diffusion panel when you, for example, to create a large gradient when photographing reflective material, what is the function of grids and diffused lights going into the last stage of the gradient making diffusion?
I have to read this one more time. What is the function of
so
grids,
the last part,
diffused lights?
So one thing is absolutely, Stefan is correct. We will talk about gradients in a separate episode and only talk about gradients, because you're absolutely right. You can use diffusion as well as to create gradients, but that's a topic that is going to take a while when he starts explaining it. But tune in within a couple of weeks. We will cover gradients.
We will cover how to create gradients with diffusion and other things.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, that diffusion can be used for creating gradients. And what you use that for, that will be another episode.
That's another hour of discussions, because we want to explain it so that you truly understand it and feel confident in making gradients. But Stefan is onto something that the angle of light and angle of panel does change it. So with that, I think there are no more questions here. And if you pop in more questions in the comments afterwards, we do monitor them and we do go back in and answer them. So just go back to Profoto's Facebook, add questions, and we will answer them. And with that, I think, do you use a snoot? Yes, we do, every now and then.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. No, so snoots are cool as well. So we do use snoots and grids and all kinds of, basically all modifiers.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that I use snoot a lot, but I actually use snoot. For me, a snoot is the best way to quickly get a light source to be smaller.
Yeah, exactly.
That, for me, is the best way, because Of course, the patch of light, when you're trying to just light some part of it, you can use a snoot, but I think that the edge of the light stamp or the light coverage is kind of ugly, I think, with a snoot. I think a grid has a nicer fall off than a snoot.
Yeah.
But I do use them.
Cool. So I think with that, we are going to say thank you everybody for listening and hope you have found some more clarity in diffusion.
Yes, and Stefan Rodén, you will look out for that episode, please
Yes.
do, because that will be so much fun.
Oh, that's going to be so much David's area. I'm going to be standing in the corner and just nod.
Just wait. Just
But that is it is really interesting, but it can also be very tricky. So
okay.
Cinefoil.
Cinefoil.
Yeah, absolutely. You can use cinefoil. With cinefoil you can cut out small holes. You can use it to create the snoot even. So the cinefoil is very, very creative. And if you go back to last week's episode on Facebook, go into Profoto's page and look videos, you'll see we actually had a talk with Holly Wren from UK, and we actually used cinefoil to create some cool effects of like what do you call them? Shades, window shades.
Yeah.
And on there.
Does a question here from Prasad? Does diffusion help photographing products like glass? How do you control the light?
Ooh.
That is also this thing with the creating gradients and such.
Yes.
Actually, I should put in. I will do this now. Just one small thing. I'm sorry, Anders. When you're shooting glass, for example, or cutlery or silver stuff, when you're using a diffusion to create nicer reflections, actually the structure of the diffusion material will be seen in, I'm sorry Anders, will be seen in the reflections. So if you have like there is diffusion materials that is really grainy, then you will see the grainy part in the reflection. That will make the silver look like they are brushed. Maybe you want that, maybe you do want that, maybe you don't want that. So the material can be really important to enhance or hide different parts of reflections or the material, the surface. Sorry, Anders. Yeah. So you can be so nerdy with this, and I hope that we can go really deep into those kind of details.
We'll do a 5-hour special on gradients and the compression effect in reflections.
The compression effect.
We'll do that very, very late, like 3 o'clock in any time zone. We'll find out, and then all us nerds, we can gather around the campfire and talk about that. But we will definitely talk about gradients because I think that's an important topic.
So a quick question, quick answer to Prasad: yes.
Okay, good. Anywho, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all the love, and do post questions, and we will help you and answer other questions that pop up.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Do you want to learn how to light the background? In this course, we scrap all the unnecessary, overwhelming information that you see online today. Here's what you actually need to start lighting the background. My name is David Bischow. I am the light shaping expert at Profoto Academy. And in this course, you will learn the different types of shadows, light pattern, enhancing the background. Different type of shadows, the importance of understanding self-shadows and how to shape thrown shadows. Light pattern, how to control the light pattern and how that impacts contrast. Enhance the background, how to enhance the background in an exciting and natural way. So, join me in this course and I will show you how to get started today, no matter the equipment you're using.